He never made the front page. He never got caught on a wiretap saying something stupid. He never bragged, never threatened in public, and never once gave investigators enough to put him away for good. While other mob bosses were getting gunned down in barbershops or hauled off to prison in handcuffs, Gaetano Lucchese died peacefully in his bed, still in power, still untouchable, after more than 4 decades of running one of the most powerful criminal organizations in American history. In a world built on violence and betrayal, that kind of survival wasn't luck, it was genius. Gaetano Lucchese was born in Palermo, Sicily in 1919 and arrived in New York as a young boy with his family, settling in East Harlem. The neighborhood was a pressure cooker, poor, overcrowded, and full of young men with no legal path to power. Lucchese lost 3 fingers on his right hand in an industrial accident as a teenager, which earned him the nickname Three-Finger Brown, borrowed from a famous baseball pitcher of the era. That nickname stuck for life. But what people underestimated was the sharpness of the mind attached to those remaining fingers. By the time Prohibition turned America into a black market paradise in the 1920s, Lucchese had already aligned himself with the rising stars of organized crime. He worked closely with Lucky Luciano and Tommy Gagliano, learning early that the smartest men in the room weren't always the loudest ones. While flashier gangsters were attracting newspaper headlines and FBI attention, Lucchese was quietly building relationships with politicians, with judges, with law enforcement officials. He understood something that most criminals never grasped. Real power isn't about fear, it's about access. What made Lucchese genuinely dangerous and genuinely fascinating was his ability to operate in both worlds simultaneously. On one hand, he was a made man in the New York underworld, eventually becoming boss of what would later be called the Lucchese crime family. On the other hand, he cultivated an image as a legitimate businessman and even earned a reputation in certain political circles as a respectable figure. For years, he managed to convince law enforcement that he had left the criminal life behind. The FBI, one of the most powerful investigative agencies on Earth, repeatedly struggled to build a solid case against him. His business empire was diverse and deliberate. He controlled significant portions of the garment industry in Manhattan's 7th Avenue fashion district, an area so thoroughly infiltrated by organized crime that unions, shipping, and manufacturing all fed money upward through criminal channels. He had interests in trucking, construction, and airport operations. John F. Kennedy International Airport, then called Idlewild, became a particular goldmine under his influence. The cargo operations there were quietly taxed by Lucchese's people for years, a scheme so embedded in the daily operations of the airport that it ran almost like a business expense. His political connections were extraordinary even by mob standards. Lucchese had relationships with Tammany Hall, the powerful Democratic political machine that ran New York City for generations. He attended inaugural ceremonies, mingled with congressmen, and once famously managed to get a family member a coveted appointment through political channels, all while technically being a known organized crime figure. The brazenness of it was almost beautiful in its audacity. He existed in plain sight, protected not by muscle but by relationships. He also had a gift for managing conflict internally. The 5 New York crime families operated under a commission system established by Luciano in 1931, and Lucchese was consistently one of its most respected voices. He avoided the brutal internal power struggles that destroyed other families. He didn't rule through terror alone, he ruled through respect, strategic thinking, and the kind of long-term patience that most criminals simply don't possess. By the time the American government began its serious organized crime crackdown in the early 1960s, driven in part by Attorney General Robert Kennedy's relentless pursuit of the mob, Lucchese was already in his 60s and in declining health. He had outlasted rivals, survived investigations, and watched dozens of contemporaries fall while he remained standing. He died in July 1967 from a brain tumor, still the boss of his family, never having served a significant prison sentence for his organized crime activities.
The Lucchese family continued operating under other bosses long after his death, eventually becoming infamous through figures like Henry Hill, whose story was immortalized in the film Goodfellas. But the man who built it all, the quiet Sicilian with 3 fingers and extraordinary patience, had already made his exit on his own terms. In a business where almost nobody does, Gaetano Lucchese won.